Welcome to a documentary experience defined by absolute transparency. We guarantee that the upcoming scenes are entirely unfiltered and unedited. This is raw, immersive footage from the front lines of justice, providing an unpolished look at those who uphold the law.
Ma'am, give me your ID right now.
Sir, what seems to be the problem?
You're acting suspicious. ID now.
I'm just getting gas. I can comply if you...
Stop talking and do what I told you.
My children are here. Please step back.
Hands where I can see them.
The dashboard camera footage revealed everything in crystal clear detail. At 3:17 p.m. on a scorching Tuesday afternoon, a black Mercedes sedan pulled into pump number 4 at the East Side Shell station. Behind the wheel sat a distinguished woman in her early 50s, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the kind of professional attire that spoke of courtrooms and legal briefs. In the back seat, 2 children aged 8 and 12 were absorbed in their tablets, completely unaware that their ordinary day was about to become a nightmare that would forever change their family's life. What happened next would shock the nation, spark federal investigations, and result in one of the largest police brutality settlements in state history. But more than that, it would expose a culture of corruption and racial bias so deep that it would take years to fully unravel. The woman stepping out of that Mercedes had no idea she was about to become the center of a legal storm that would reshape how we think about police accountability. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. And if this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button because stories like this one need to be told, and you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Trust me, what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Judge Rebecca Coleman had just finished a particularly challenging day in family court. She had presided over 3 custody hearings, 2 adoption proceedings, and 1 case involving child endangerment that had kept her up the night before. As one of only 7 black female judges in the entire state, she carried the weight of representation on her shoulders every single day. She knew that her decisions, her demeanor, and even her appearance were scrutinized more closely than her white male counterparts. That afternoon, she had picked up her daughter Maya and son Joshua from their summer camp program. Maya was 8 years old, a bright kid who wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Joshua, 12, was obsessed with basketball and had been begging his mom to let him try out for the travel team. They were typical kids with typical dreams, and Rebecca worked hard to give them a normal childhood despite the demands of her position. The gas station stop was routine. Rebecca's Mercedes was running low on fuel, and she wanted to fill up before the evening rush hour traffic made the drive home even longer. She pulled up to the pump, turned off the engine, and told the kids she'd be right back. Maya barely looked up from her tablet, where she was watching videos about baby animals. Joshua was deep in a basketball game on his phone. Rebecca stepped out of her car, inserted her credit card into the pump, and began the familiar process of filling her tank. The gas station was moderately busy, with the usual mix of commuters heading home from work. Nothing seemed unusual. The sun was bright, the temperature was climbing toward 90 degrees, and Rebecca was already thinking about what to make for dinner. That's when Officer Kevin Nash spotted her from his patrol car parked across the street. Nash was a 15-year veteran of the Metro Police Department, with a history that would later become the subject of intense scrutiny. He had joined the force straight out of high school, working his way up from beat cop to patrol supervisor. On paper, his record looked decent enough. He had received commendations for community service and had never been formally disciplined for excessive force. But scratch beneath the surface, and a different picture emerged. Internal complaints had been filed against Nash 7 times in the past 3 years. All 7 complaints came from black citizens who claimed he had treated them with unnecessary aggression or had stopped them without probable cause. Each complaint had been investigated by his own department and dismissed due to lack of evidence or conflicting witness statements. Nash's fellow officers consistently backed up his version of events, and the complainants were often portrayed as unreliable or having ulterior motives. What the department didn't know was that Nash had been posting on social media forums under an anonymous username for years. He shared his views about certain neighborhoods, certain types of people, and what he saw as the real problems facing law enforcement. These posts would later be discovered by federal investigators and would paint a picture of an officer whose personal beliefs had no business being anywhere near a badge and gun. That Tuesday afternoon, Nash claimed later in his incident report that he noticed a black Mercedes at the gas station and thought the vehicle looked suspicious. He said something about the way the driver was acting seemed off, though he could never articulate exactly what that meant. He decided to conduct what he called a welfare check. Nash pulled his cruiser into the gas station parking lot and approached Rebecca while she was still pumping gas. The children were still in the back seat, visible through the rear windows, still absorbed in their devices. Rebecca noticed the police car pull up but didn't think much of it. Officers sometimes stopped at gas stations for coffee or snacks. She continued pumping her gas. Nash got out of his patrol car and walked directly toward Rebecca. His body language was already aggressive, his shoulders squared, his hand resting on his duty belt. Rebecca looked up as he approached, offering the polite smile she had learned to give to law enforcement officers, the kind of smile that said she was cooperative and non-threatening. Nash didn't return the smile. Instead, he demanded to see her identification. Rebecca, confused, asked if there was a problem. Nash repeated his demand, louder this time, drawing the attention of other customers at nearby pumps. Rebecca remained calm and asked again what the issue was. She explained that she was simply getting gas and would be leaving shortly. This is when Nash made his first major mistake. He told Rebecca that she was acting suspicious and that he had received reports of someone matching her description involved in suspicious activity in the area. This was a complete lie, and the gas station's security cameras would later prove that Nash had no radio communication about any suspicious activity. He had fabricated the entire justification for the stop. Rebecca, drawing on her years of legal experience, asked Nash to be specific about what activity she was suspected of. She spoke calmly and clearly, using the kind of measured tone she employed in her courtroom. She knew her rights, and she knew that Nash's behavior was already crossing legal lines. But she also knew that challenging a police officer, especially as a black woman, could escalate a situation quickly and dangerously. Nash didn't like being questioned. He stepped closer to Rebecca, invading her personal space. He told her to stop asking questions and produce her identification immediately. Rebecca, still trying to de-escalate, reached for her purse to retrieve her driver's license. As she did, Nash apparently decided that her movement toward her purse was threatening. What happened next was captured on multiple security cameras from different angles. Nash grabbed Rebecca's wrist and twisted it behind her back before she could even open her purse. She cried out in pain and told him he was hurting her. Nash ignored her and forced her to bend over the hood of her car. The gas pump handle was still in the tank, gas still flowing. Other customers at the gas station stopped what they were doing and began to stare. Some pulled out their phones and started recording. A few people called out, asking if everything was okay. Nash yelled for everyone to mind their own business and step back. Inside the Mercedes, Maya and Joshua heard their mother's voice. They looked up from their devices to see a police officer forcing their mother over the hood of their car. Maya started crying immediately. Joshua, older and more aware of what was happening, began recording on his phone while shouting for the officer to stop hurting his mom. Rebecca tried to explain to Nash that she was a judge, that there had been a misunderstanding, and that she would gladly show him her identification if he would just let her reach for it safely. Nash either didn't hear her or didn't care. He was committed to his course of action now, and backing down would mean admitting he had made a mistake. Nash called for backup, claiming over his radio that he had a combative suspect who was resisting arrest. This was another lie that would later be contradicted by the video evidence. Rebecca was not combative, and she was certainly not resisting arrest, since Nash had never actually announced that she was under arrest for anything. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived at the scene. Officers Williams and Rodriguez stepped out of their vehicles and immediately assessed the situation. What they saw should have been a red flag. A well-dressed professional woman bent over a car hood while Nash held her in place, 2 children crying in the back seat, and a crowd of witnesses recording everything on their phones. Instead of questioning Nash's actions or attempting to de-escalate, Both officers assumed that Nash must have had good reason for the detention. This assumption would prove to be another critical failure in the chain of events that was spiraling out of control. Nash decided he needed to search Rebecca's purse for weapons or evidence of whatever crime he was convinced she had committed. When he reached for her purse, Rebecca instinctively pulled it closer to her body. This natural protective response was interpreted by Nash as continued resistance. Have you ever witnessed something like this happening in public? Let me know in the comments if you've seen police interactions that made you uncomfortable. Nash made the decision to physically remove the purse from Rebecca's possession. As he grabbed for it, Rebecca stumbled slightly, trying to maintain her balance while still bent over the car hood. Nash interpreted this as an attempt to flee or fight back. What happened next would become the focal point of the federal civil rights lawsuit that followed. Nash, claiming that Rebecca was actively resisting and potentially dangerous, made the split-second decision to take her to the ground. But this wasn't a controlled takedown or a textbook arrest procedure. This was a violent tackle that sent both of them crashing into the pavement next to the gas pump. Rebecca's head hit the concrete with a sickening thud that was audible on the security camera footage. Her professional blazer tore as she scraped across the rough asphalt. Nash's full body weight came down on top of her, driving her face first into the ground. The impact was so severe that witnesses later said they thought they had just watched someone die. Maya's screaming intensified as she watched her mother disappear beneath the police officer. Joshua jumped out of the car, still recording, screaming at Nash to get off his mom. Officer Rodriguez had to physically restrain the 12-year-old boy to prevent him from interfering with what Nash was still claiming was a lawful arrest. Rebecca lay motionless for several seconds, blood beginning to pool beneath her head where it had struck the concrete. Nash, realizing that the situation had escalated far beyond what he had intended, finally got off of her and called for an ambulance. But the damage was done, and not just the physical damage to Rebecca's body. The crowd of witnesses had grown larger, and multiple people were now recording from different angles. The gas station's security system had captured everything in high definition. A sitting judge had just been brutally tackled by a police officer in front of her children for the crime of getting gas while black. Rebecca remained unconscious for nearly 3 minutes while paramedics were en route. During those terrifying moments, Nash stood over her motionless body, apparently trying to process what he had just done. Officer Williams knelt beside Rebecca, checking for a pulse while repeatedly asking if she could hear him. The children's cries echoed across the gas station parking lot, creating a scene that would haunt everyone who witnessed it. When Rebecca finally regained consciousness, she was disoriented and bleeding from a deep gash on her forehead. Her vision was blurry, and she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. The first thing she saw was Nash's face hovering above her, and she instinctively tried to move away from him, which Nash again interpreted as resistance. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after Nash's call for medical assistance. Paramedic Sarah Johnson later testified that she had never seen such obvious head trauma from what was supposed to be a routine police detention. Rebecca's pupils were dilated, she was showing signs of severe concussion, and she had sustained multiple lacerations from the concrete impact. But Nash wasn't finished. Even as paramedics were trying to assess Rebecca's injuries, he insisted on handcuffing her to the ambulance gurney. When Rebecca asked why she was being arrested, Nash told her she was being charged with resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, and disorderly conduct. None of these charges had any basis in reality, but Nash needed to justify his actions somehow. The ride to Metro General Hospital became another chapter in this growing nightmare. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness while handcuffed to a medical stretcher. Maya and Joshua were not allowed to ride in the ambulance with their mother. Instead, they were left at the gas station with Officer Rodriguez, 2 traumatized children who had just watched their mother get brutally attacked by someone who was supposed to protect and serve. What do you think should have happened to Nash immediately after this incident? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. At the hospital, Rebecca was taken directly to the emergency room where Dr. Amanda Foster began evaluating her injuries. The head trauma was severe enough to require a CT scan to rule out brain bleeding. She had sustained a concussion, multiple facial lacerations, severe bruising on her back and shoulders, and a sprained wrist from when Nash had twisted her arm behind her back. Dr. Foster was appalled when she learned that her patient was handcuffed to the hospital bed. She demanded that Nash remove the restraints, pointing out that Rebecca was clearly in no condition to pose a threat to anyone. Nash refused, claiming that Rebecca was a dangerous criminal who might try to escape. The absurdity of this statement became even more apparent when Dr. Foster learned that Rebecca was a sitting judge. Nash had no idea who he had just brutalized. In his incident report, he described Rebecca as an uncooperative suspect who had matched the description of someone involved in suspicious activity. He claimed she had resisted his lawful commands and had attempted to assault him during the arrest. Every single word was a fabrication, but Nash was counting on the usual blue wall of silence to protect him. The truth began to emerge when Rebecca's husband, Dr. Michael Coleman, arrived at the hospital after receiving a frantic call from Joshua. Michael was a respected cardiologist at the same hospital where his wife was now being treated. When he saw Rebecca handcuffed to a bed with her face covered in bandages, he immediately understood that something catastrophic had occurred. Michael demanded answers from Nash, who was still stationed outside Rebecca's hospital room. Nash gave him the same story about suspicious activity and resisting arrest. Michael, who had been married to Rebecca for 16 years, knew that his wife would never resist a police officer. She was too smart, too experienced with the legal system, and too aware of the dangers that confrontation could bring. That's when Michael revealed what Nash had been trying to avoid facing all afternoon. He told Nash that his wife was Judge Rebecca Coleman of the 5th District Court, a woman who had spent her entire career working within the justice system that Nash claimed to represent. The color drained from Nash's face as the implications of what he had done began to sink in. Within an hour, news of the incident had reached the courthouse where Rebecca worked. Judge Harold Patterson, the chief judge of the district, immediately contacted the mayor's office and the police commissioner. Word spread quickly through the legal community that one of their own had been brutally assaulted by a police officer while simply getting gas with her children. The police department's initial response was predictable and infuriating. Commissioner Robert Hayes held a press conference that evening where he promised a thorough investigation while also cautioning the public not to rush to judgment. He emphasized that police officers make split-second decisions in dangerous situations and that all the facts needed to be gathered before drawing conclusions. This measured response might have worked if the incident had been captured by a single, grainy security camera from a distance. But the gas station's high-definition surveillance system had recorded everything from multiple angles. Additionally, at least 12 witnesses had recorded portions of the encounter on their phones. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The video footage began circulating on social media that same evening. The first clip, posted by Joshua himself, showed Nash tackling his mother to the ground while Maya screamed in the background. The 19-second video was viewed over 2 million times in the first 6 hours after it was posted. The hashtag Justice for Judge Coleman began trending nationally before midnight. Legal experts who reviewed the footage were unanimous in their assessment. Rebecca had done nothing that could remotely justify Nash's actions. She had been polite, cooperative, and had attempted to comply with his requests. Nash had escalated the situation at every turn, lied about his justifications, and used excessive force against a woman who posed no threat whatsoever. The children's trauma became another devastating element of the story. Maya, who was only 8 years old, had nightmares every night for weeks after the incident. She would wake up screaming, convinced that police officers were coming to hurt her mother again. Joshua, who had tried to be brave and document what was happening, blamed himself for not doing more to protect Rebecca. Child psychologist Dr. Lisa Chen, who would later treat both children, explained that witnessing a parent being violently attacked by an authority figure creates deep psychological wounds that can last a lifetime. The children had learned in the most traumatic way possible that the world was not safe, that people in positions of power could hurt their family without consequences. Rebecca spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from her injuries. The physical wounds would heal, but the psychological trauma ran much deeper. She had dedicated her life to believing in the justice system, to the idea that law and order existed to protect innocent people. In one afternoon, a rogue police officer had shattered that fundamental belief. The legal response began immediately. Rebecca's brother, attorney David Coleman, flew in from Washington, D.C., where he worked as a federal prosecutor. He brought with him a team of civil rights lawyers who specialized in police misconduct cases. They began gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing what would become one of the most significant police brutality lawsuits in the state's history. Nash, meanwhile, was placed on administrative leave pending the department's internal investigation. He hired attorney Frank Morrison, a lawyer who specialized in defending police officers accused of excessive force. Morrison's strategy was predictable. He would argue that Nash had acted within his training and that the incident had been blown out of proportion by anti-police sentiment. The first major break in the case came when federal investigators obtained Nash's complete personnel file and began digging into his background. What they discovered was a pattern of behavior that the local police department had either ignored or actively covered up. The 7 previous complaints against Nash were just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators found that Nash had been involved in 17 use-of-force incidents in his 15-year career, a rate that was nearly 4 times higher than the department average. In each case, Nash had claimed that the suspect was resisting or posed a threat. In each case, the suspects were black or Hispanic. In each case, Nash's version of events had been accepted without serious scrutiny. The federal investigation also uncovered Nash's social media activity. Under the username Patriot Officer 1987, Nash had posted hundreds of messages on law enforcement forums expressing his views about crime, race, and policing. The posts revealed a man who saw certain communities as inherently criminal and who believed that aggressive policing was the only way to maintain order. One particularly damning post, written just 2 months before the incident with Rebecca, read, "These people think they can drive around in fancy cars and act like they're better than everyone else. They need to be reminded that the law applies to them too, no matter how much money they have or what kind of job they think makes them special." The discovery of these posts transformed the case from a simple, excessive force incident into a federal civil rights violation with clear evidence of racial motivation. Nash had targeted Rebecca not because of any suspicious behavior, but because he couldn't tolerate seeing a successful black woman in an expensive car. Public pressure mounted as more details emerged. Protests began forming outside the police station and the courthouse. Community leaders demanded Nash's immediate termination and criminal prosecution. The state attorney general announced that her office would conduct its own investigation parallel to the federal inquiry. Rebecca, still recovering from her physical injuries, made the difficult decision to speak publicly about what had happened to her. At a press conference held 1 week after the incident, she sat beside her husband and children, her face still showing the bruises from Nash's attack. Her statement was measured and powerful. She spoke about the fear she had felt lying unconscious on the concrete, not knowing if she would survive to see her children grow up. She talked about the trauma her kids had experienced and the long road to recovery that lay ahead for their entire family. But she also spoke about justice and accountability. Rebecca made it clear that she wasn't seeking revenge against Nash or the police department. She wanted systemic change that would prevent other families from experiencing the same trauma. She wanted training programs, oversight mechanisms, and cultural shifts that would root out the kind of thinking that had led to her assault. The legal proceedings moved forward on multiple fronts. The federal civil rights investigation continued gathering evidence. The state was preparing criminal charges against Nash, and Rebecca's civil lawsuit was building toward what would become a historic settlement. Nash's defense began crumbling as more evidence emerged. Security footage from other businesses in the area showed Nash's patrol car following Rebecca's Mercedes for several blocks before the gas station stop, contradicting his claim that the encounter was random. Cell phone records proved that Nash had not received any radio calls about suspicious activity in the area. Most damaging of all was the testimony of Officer Williams, Nash's backup, who had arrived at the scene. Under pressure from federal investigators, and facing potential charges himself for failing to intervene, Williams admitted that Nash's actions had seemed excessive from the moment he arrived at the gas station. Williams testified that Nash had already escalated the situation beyond what any reasonable officer would consider appropriate. He said that Rebecca had appeared calm and cooperative, and that Nash's decision to tackle her seemed to come from nowhere. Williams admitted that he should have stepped in to stop Nash, but had been afraid to challenge a senior officer. This testimony was crucial because it came from within the police department itself. It demonstrated that even Nash's fellow officers recognized that his behavior was outside the bounds of acceptable police conduct. The criminal case against Nash moved through the system with unprecedented speed. District Attorney Maria Santos, who had worked closely with Rebecca on several high-profile cases over the years, personally took charge of the prosecution. Santos had never seen such clear-cut evidence of police misconduct in her 23 years as a prosecutor. The grand jury took less than 2 hours to return indictments against Nash on multiple charges, including aggravated assault, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, filing false police reports, and official misconduct. Each charge carried significant prison time, and the federal hate crime enhancements meant Nash was looking at potentially decades behind bars. Nash's attorney tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal, but Santos wasn't interested in bargaining. The evidence was too strong, the misconduct too egregious, and the public interest too great. This case would go to trial, and Nash would face the full consequences of his actions. The trial began 6 months after the gas station incident. The courthouse was packed every day with supporters of the Coleman family, civil rights activists, and members of the legal community who wanted to see justice served. Security was tight as emotions ran high on both sides. Rebecca testified on the second day of the trial. She described in vivid detail the confusion and terror she felt as Nash escalated what should have been a simple interaction. She talked about the moment she realized her children were watching their mother being brutally attacked by someone they had been taught to trust and respect. The most powerful moment came when Rebecca described regaining consciousness on the concrete. She said the first thing she thought about wasn't her own injuries, but whether Maya and Joshua would ever feel safe again. The courtroom was completely silent as she spoke, and several jurors were visibly moved by her testimony. The defense tried to portray Nash as a dedicated officer who had made an honest mistake under pressure. They brought in character witnesses and attempted to argue that Nash had genuinely believed Rebecca posed a threat. But the video evidence made their arguments seem ridiculous. No reasonable person watching the footage could conclude that Rebecca had done anything threatening or suspicious. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They played the security camera footage from multiple angles, showing clearly that Rebecca had been cooperative throughout the encounter. They presented Nash's social media posts, revealing his pattern of racial bias. They called expert witnesses who explained how Nash's actions violated every standard of professional police conduct. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a use of force expert and former police captain, testified that Nash's decision to tackle Rebecca was not only unnecessary but criminally reckless. She explained that taking someone to the ground on concrete carries a high risk of serious injury or death, and that such force should only be used when facing an immediate threat to life or safety. The jury also heard from the gas station witnesses who had recorded the incident on their phones. One after another, they testified that Rebecca had appeared calm and confused, not aggressive or threatening. A retired teacher named Robert Jenkins said watching Nash attack Rebecca was one of the most disturbing things he had ever witnessed. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Nash's own training instructors at the police academy. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, who had taught de-escalation techniques for 15 years, reviewed the footage and testified that Nash had violated virtually every principle she had taught him about managing civilian encounters. Nash took the stand in his own defense, a decision that proved disastrous. Under cross-examination, he couldn't explain why he had lied in his incident report about receiving calls about suspicious activity. He couldn't justify why he had escalated the encounter instead of simply asking to see Rebecca's identification. And he couldn't provide any reasonable explanation for why tackling an unarmed woman to concrete pavement had been necessary. The prosecutor pressed Nash about his social media posts, forcing him to read some of his most inflammatory comments aloud in court. When asked if he believed his attitudes about race had influenced his treatment of Rebecca, Nash claimed they hadn't, but his defensive responses suggested otherwise. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Nash showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his family members in the courtroom broke down in tears. Rebecca, sitting in the front row with her husband and children, felt a mixture of relief and sadness as justice was finally served. The sentencing hearing took place 2 months later. Judge Thomas Anderson, who had presided over the trial, made it clear that he viewed Nash's crimes as particularly heinous because they had been committed under color of law. Anderson noted that police officers take an oath to protect and serve, and Nash had violated that sacred trust in the most brutal way possible. Nash received 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the Coleman family for their medical expenses and counseling costs. Most importantly, Nash was permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. The civil lawsuit against the police department moved forward simultaneously with the criminal case. Rebecca's legal team had assembled a mountain of evidence showing that Nash's behavior was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of racial bias and excessive force that the department had failed to address. Internal documents revealed that the police department had received dozens of complaints about racially motivated stops and searches over the past 5 years. Nearly all of these complaints had been dismissed without serious investigation. The department's own data showed that black motorists were stopped at rates far higher than their representation in the population, yet contraband was found at lower rates than with white drivers. The federal investigation had also uncovered evidence of a toxic culture within certain units of the police department. Officers routinely made racist jokes and comments, and those who spoke out against such behavior faced retaliation and ostracism. Nash had thrived in this environment, emboldened by supervisors who looked the other way and colleagues who shared his biases. Commissioner Hayes, who had initially defended Nash's actions, was forced to resign in disgrace when internal emails revealed that he had been aware of multiple complaints against Nash but had taken no meaningful action. The emails showed Hayes dismissing the complaints as politically motivated attacks on law enforcement. The city brought in a new police commissioner, Angela Foster, a reform-minded leader from another state who had a track record of cleaning up troubled departments. Foster immediately implemented new training programs, revised use of force policies, and established an independent oversight board with civilian members. But the damage to the department's reputation was severe and lasting. Community trust, built up over decades, had been shattered in a single afternoon at a gas station. Foster faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding relationships with communities that now viewed police with suspicion and fear. The settlement negotiations were intense and prolonged. The city's insurance company initially offered $2 million, an amount that Rebecca's attorneys immediately rejected as insulting. They pointed to recent settlements in similar cases and argued that the Coleman family deserved much more, both for the severity of the assault and the clear evidence of institutional failure. As the negotiations dragged on, more evidence emerged about the department's systemic problems. A whistleblower came forward with documents showing that Nash's supervisors had altered previous incident reports to make his actions appear more justified. This discovery added another layer of misconduct to an already damning case. The breakthrough came when federal mediators became involved in the settlement talks. They helped both sides understand that a prolonged court battle would be expensive and traumatic for everyone involved. The city faced the prospect of a jury trial, where the damages could be even higher, while the Coleman family wanted to focus on healing rather than years of litigation. The final settlement amount shocked the legal community. $15 million was one of the largest police misconduct settlements in state history, and it sent a clear message about the consequences of racial profiling and excessive force. The settlement included not just monetary compensation, but also mandatory reforms to police training, oversight, and accountability. Rebecca announced that she would donate a significant portion of the settlement to organizations working on police reform and racial justice. She established the Coleman Foundation, which provides legal assistance to victims of police misconduct and supports research into bias in law enforcement. Officer Kevin Nash's 15 minutes of unchecked power cost him everything and changed countless lives forever. Rebecca Coleman transformed her trauma into lasting reform, proving that sometimes justice does prevail when good people refuse to stay silent. Her courage in that gas station parking lot and in every courtroom battle that followed reminds us that accountability isn't just possible, it's essential. What started as a routine stop for gas became a catalyst for change that will protect families for generations to come. Sometimes the most ordinary moments become extraordinary turning points in the fight for justice. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.
Driven by the pursuit of truth, our mission is to demand transparency and hold power to account. We trust in hard evidence because the records do not lie. Thank you for watching and staying informed.